Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Jonathan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Evan.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? I hope you're ready to learn.
And today's episode is about how screens work. So we'll just get straight into it. Evan, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, I'm going to be your main conductor for this since it's sort of my area of expertise, knowing about more electrically focused things. But if you've ever wondered what LED, LCD, plasma, OLED, QLED, all that sort of stuff, by the end of this, you're going to be an expert. And also, we're going to talk briefly about how touchscreens work, especially on your phone, because sort of what's behind all of this is you use these things every day, right? And these are things you hear. And so it'd be interesting to know a little bit more how they work, especially with like the touchscreen on your phone. Like, how does that work?
It's stuff that you kind of interact with on some level every day. And so I think it's cool to know exactly what's in your hands and like the research and development that's gone into it to make that tech work, where you kind of don't think about it twice, right? You kind of just use it, you're like, all right, I can see stuff on the screen. So I guess the first question, if we were to jump straight into it, is what are LED, LCD, and plasma screens?
Alrighty, so I'll take you through LED screens first. So what LED actually stands for is light emitting diode. So what a diode is, it's sort of like an electrical component that's built using semiconductors. And semiconductors are something that's halfway between a conductor, which conducts electricity well, hence the name, which is like copper, and an insulator, which doesn't conduct electricity well, which is like rubber or something. And using these, you can make some interesting electrical devices such as diodes. And diodes are special because they only allow electricity to travel through them in one direction. So it can go like front to back, but not back to front. And there's special ways of manufacturing these. So as the electricity travels through the semiconductor, it emits light. And this is really good for us because it's a much more energy efficient implementation of emitting light, which is compared to what was used in the past in like light bulbs. They would actually like heat a filament, right? And that's physically heating something, which is very energy inefficient. So that's sort of like the impetus of where LEDs have come from and why they're good and why they're so prevalent nowadays. But the thing about these is the color that you get out of it depends on the way that the semiconductor is set up. If you know this stuff in a little more detail, it depends on the size of the band gap in the semiconductor, which is basically how much more energy the electrons need to go from one side to the other. And yeah, so basically this gives you different colors. So they can be manufactured. The main ones you would see are like red and green.
Okay, so you're saying that like would certain colors have like more energy requirement to produce, or it's not by much? Like it's negligible.
It's like really negligible. Yeah, it's such a tiny amount, but it does make the difference. These things are manufactured to be like pretty accurately done. So like yeah. It's on a really tiny scale.
Right. And I guess the quality of the diodes would reflect in the quality of the screen, like the LED screen, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So basically for making a screen as well, this is how like each individual pixel would be composed of 3 different LEDs, right? So you got RGB. So this allows you to do like color control. The smaller that you can make each of these LEDs in like each pixel, the more pixels you can fit in, and like obviously you can make the screen look better.
Right, so they combine the colors together to mix to get whatever you need to see.
Yeah, so you have like RGB, that's how a lot of stuff's done. I'm sure you've heard RGB before, but mixing these colors gives you different you can mix these to make like purple and orange and ones that aren't the RGB to begin with. And also another interesting thing about LEDs is, like I said, it's a diode, and it's either conducting or it's not conducting. So the electricity is going through it or it's not going through it. And so this means you can only really have one brightness. But the way, like you've seen, sometimes there's like darker and lighter things on a screen. And the way this is done is you flash the LEDs more or less. So like you would be flashing them hundreds of times a second, but if you flash them at like a higher rate, it'll look brighter. And if you flash them at a lower rate, it'll look darker. But this isn't really observable. You can't see it flashing because it's flashing so fast. It's on like it's going so fast, but you can't perceive it, but it's actually like letting out less light.
Wow, that's crazy. I actually, I didn't know that. That's really cool. So I guess like depending again on the quality of the LED TV, that you could have like a better brightness range.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, yeah.
It's just up to the
depending on
manufacturer.
how well the LEDs are done and everything, and like how small each one of them are, and yeah.
LCDs, I guess, are the next one.
Yes. So that was LEDs. So LCD, even though it sounds similar, it's implemented pretty differently. So it stands for liquid crystal display. And so there's literally a layer that's of liquid crystals between, like in this screen, and that's the main thing that makes it work, hence the name. And so you would know these screens that are different to LEDs because they're, when you like press your finger against them, they go all liquidy and weird around your finger. Like they're used in a lot of calculators that you would have used for school maybe, and they're also used in like the Nintendo DS screens. I don't know if you remember, like when you press up against them, they go all funny. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. That's the sort of thing that only people of a very specific age would be able to relate to. I
think I just remember it because it's like it was like the first touchscreen console. And so, like, I think they're still fairly new, like touchscreens then. So
yeah, for sure. So you're going to be pressing them a lot.
Yeah, like if people press the top screen, like, why isn't it working? And then it's only the bottom screen that was touchscreen.
Anyway, so the way this works is it's based on the polarization of light. So light has something called polarization. If you look up at the sun right now or a light near you, it's likely that the light is unpolarized. So that means it's scattered and... Dude, going in all random directions.
You just blinded like a dozen people out there.
Just look directly at the sun, yeah.
No shades, straight at it. Don't even close your eyes.
Yeah. But anyway, polarization of light basically means it only sort of comes in one direction. So try and imagine something, you know, like ladder shades, how they have like all the horizontal slits going in front of them. Imagine that, except it's like much, much smaller. So there's lots of like tiny little horizontal slits. And so if light goes through that, it's only going to be coming sort of in that direction, right? It's going to be going like left to right horizontal. Sort of to clarify, it's coming towards you still, but it's only exists in that like left to right direction. And so then if you have this one that's going like horizontally only, and so if you put another one of these polarization filters, it's called, like all the horizontal, like it would be vertical now. You put one of these vertical slat things, the light would only be coming in vertically. And so if you put these one after the other, it actually stops the light completely because it can't go from horizontal to vertical. It just can't get through.
So you're saying like it's kind of like if you put your hands, like if like when there's sun and you put your hands in a certain way, you can like make animals and stuff. It's kind of like that where you can block out light with like multiple kind of these filters to make whatever you want to come out. Is that kind of a close?
Kind of. The thing is, even when you have the horizontal and vertical ones, there are still gaps between them. So light should be able to go through, but because it's polarized, it's not. So like you're not physically blocking it. There's still gaps in the filters, but the light can't get through because it's polarized in such a way that it just blocks it out. Yeah. So anyway, in the actual screen, there's like the liquid crystal film, and then on either side of these, there's these filters. So one of them's horizontal and one of them's vertical. So by default, when you're looking at this screen, you're just going to see something that's black, right? Because the light can't get through. But what you can do with the liquid crystal layer of it is when you apply electricity to it, it polarizes the light in a random direction. So after it goes through the horizontal one, which would make the light only horizontal, it then goes through the liquid crystal and this scatters it in all random directions, meaning it can go through the vertical one. And so it goes through and then gets reflected and it comes back at you and you can see it. You will like the screen will be black by default if you don't have anything going on in that liquid crystal layer. But by like applying electricity to different parts of the screen in the liquid crystal part, you can make pixels.
That's crazy. I legitimately just thought that they worked like, well, I knew about the liquid crystal layer. I just thought like there's like a little like laser gun inside that just shot them all and then just turned them different colors.
Well, the thing is, I never knew it was actually like a physical layer of liquid. Like, it's just cool. I don't know.
I guess it makes sense. Like, when you see in like when people break plasma TVs, do they leak? I feel like I've seen that. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I'm just thinking.
Well, like these. We'll get to plasma later. That has gas instead of this liquid.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you can make different colors in this one by having like different color filters. So, you know, like Anaglyph 3D glasses, like the red and blue, each eye is a different color. It's like if you look through one, it's red and one is blue. Yeah, Anaglyph 3D.
That's amazing. I don't even know. I thought it was just like gimmick 3D because it's just got like, you have the weird
Yeah,
colors.
it's kind of gimmicky. Hey, it's a very 2000s thing. 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Shrek 3D. That's the best 3D movie of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I think it was called 4D because it was like Shrek 3 was already out or something. Anyways.
So we can move on to plasma now. So plasma uses what's called plasma, obviously, hence the name, which is ionized gas. And so there's a bunch of different little cells that sit in the screen. And when you apply electricity to these, it excites the gas and this releases light. And so you can make different cells that contain different gases and they'll emit different kinds of light. So that's how you get your red, green, blue. You would just have all the different colors of light, and by applying a different amount of electricity, you get different colors coming through. And so what would make these work is you would have to make these the cells containing the gas as small as possible and put as many of them in there to make like a good looking screen. But notably, you're exciting the gas, so this sort of heats it up. So these screens run quite hot. They get up to like 30 to 40 degrees Celsius.
I guess people, you wouldn't really encounter that too much because you're holding your TV often, right?
Oh, exactly. But even still, you might notice it. It's like you notice in old cathode ray TVs, it gets like a layer of static on the top. So if you go near it, you get like zapped. So yeah, that's its own thing. But anyway, those are the main three kinds of displays that you would see nowadays. And then there's things like OLED and QLED. Those are just two different kinds of LED. OLED stands for organic LED, and this just uses like a thin film as the semiconductor instead, and it lets them get sort of different colors and better picture quality. And QLED, the Q stands for quantum, and this means it uses quantum I know, it's exciting, right? It's a buzzword. This means they use quantum dots, which are basically just really, really small semiconductors. So you can make these things way smaller, and so you can get like more pixels per inch. You can like fit more into the screen. So that's kind of what's going on there. But at the end of the day, these are sort of just like marketing buzzwords that get used. It's like, ooh, QLED, it's quantum. Yep. And then another thing that you might hear quite often is called a retina display, which is an Apple specific term that they have made up, and it refers to their LCD or OLED displays that are really good and have like a really high pixels per inch. So they just look clean, right? I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's like using a 4K monitor, right? It's just there's so many pixels in that small area that things just look almost better than real life. It's kind of weird.
I guess this is one of those things that for what's the word for like this like screenophiles, like people who like are really into like their screens and like the quality and like resolutions and refresh rates and all that. Like I think, at least for myself, like I think my kind of care for it extends as far as like, oh, is it a 4K monitor or is it 180p, and oh, does it have like this refresh rate? And after that, it's like, okay, cool. Like it doesn't
exactly, yeah. It really depends on how far you want to go with it. And for a lot of jobs, for like doing video editing, for example, you want a good looking screen so you can make sure like the color is consistent throughout every scene and everything. You want to be able to fix it up, and like having a good display sort of shows a true representation of what it's actually going to look like. Yeah, but at the end of the day, you can't really predict what screen other people will be watching it on. So you kind of just try and make it look as best as it can for you, and it'll work for everybody else if you're seeing like a true representation of what it is.
Okay, so I actually had a couple of questions about these screens. So you mentioned that there's always like a layer. So like for liquid crystal displays, there's that liquid crystal layer, and for plasma, there's the plasma layer. So does the thickness of this layer impact it in any ways? Does it make it better color, or is it just about like, is there any benefit for them making these screens like thinner? Because I've noticed that like if you look way back when, like I guess it's technology evolving, but they used to have some thickness to them, but now they get thinner and thinner and thinner. And is that beneficial in any way, or is it more just like a factor of marketing and manufacturing?
Well, yeah, it probably is partially that. I'd say that's mostly has to do with the electronics that like actually drive the screen though, because that's what would be like behind, because the physical screen, it has like the layer, right? And all of that stuff is really thin.
Oh, right. So it's already small inherently, so it doesn't actually.
Exactly, yeah. But I'm sure just like the electronics that sit behind that have improved to a point where they can make it smaller and like fit it in. And also you have to worry about thermals and stuff as well, because these things will heat up and you want to have like good heat sinks and ways to cool them
Vent it out
down.
and all that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing that a lot I notice a lot of TVs do, or like screens do. They have the fins on the back of them, so they kind of in the actual back panels of them. They'll have these fins so that the heat can radiate out a lot more freely. And so actually, it's another thing that I learned somewhere that don't keep the back of your TV hyper cluttered. So like some entertainment systems, they don't try to restrict the TV to like a tight space because that can be bad for the heat dissipation.
Yeah,
so I guess that's one thing to consider.
I guess the reason it happens is because you're driving so many, whatever it is, it's usually like LEDs in most displays nowadays, but there's so many of them in such a small area that it's just inevitable that all the electronics that are running there are going to generate some heat, right? But your phone doesn't really have anything like this. So that said, it is like a lot less pixels compared to like a massive TV, but your phone still does heat up, but obviously the thermals are good enough that it doesn't go overboard. But yeah. I do remember seeing on like some days when it's particularly hot, your phone will say like it's just like, nah, yeah, I gotta rest for a bit.
But that's also like it doesn't want like the battery to explode. I think because those batteries they use in phones are it's dangerous when they heat up, right? Which I think most batteries are when batteries heat up, but like specifically the capacity that phone batteries like hold and operate at, it's not good
for sure. Most electronics can run like really hot, like up to, I don't know, probably 50 to 100 degrees, so that's fine. But yeah, it's usually because something like the battery would heat up and it's dangerous.
Cool. And so I guess we'll move on to how touchscreens work. So I feel like that this would be a fairly interesting topic for everyone, because I don't think anyone's without a phone nowadays.
Yeah, well, but probably a touchscreen is something that you would use every day. And so it works basically by something called capacitive sensing. So on like the outer layer of the phone screen is like a glass layer, right? That's what you actually physically touch. But right behind that is a transparent conductor that's really thin. So it's a conductor, so it's like copper or something, and conducts electricity well. And so they have electricity running into that. And so that electricity sort of just sits there on that conductor, right? So when you put your finger on the glass, you become a capacitor with this conductor. And so what a capacitor is, it's basically two parallel conductors, and having them in like a configuration like this allows energy to be stored in between these. And so the electricity that's on the conductor inside your phone can travel to you because you like conduct electricity. And so basically every time you touch your phone, it zaps you, and it can sense like how much it's zapping you and in what location. And so that's how it like detects where you've touched the phone.
What?
But that said, it's like such a small amount of being zapped that you'll never feel it. But that's also the reason why, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but you can actually like use your touchscreen without physically touching the glass. If you put your finger like just slightly above it, it's still enough like of the capacitance forming for the electricity to travel to you.
No, I haven't noticed that. No, but like also like like this just feels like this feels like it should be more well known. This is crazy. Like I honestly thought that you're just pressing pressing some material into like a sensing pad, and then it kind of would just say, oh, like kind of how like buttons but without the buttons. Maybe
yeah, so stupid. I know what you mean. Well, you can kind of tell the difference though, because some touchscreens do require you to physically touch them harder, or they use a stylus or something, like the Nintendo DS ones, for example. And those work like you're saying, like you push two screens together, and so like you're physically pushing two things together, and then there's a way of detecting like where it was pushed together. But this one, it's just like smoother and nicer to interact with, right? It's just like feels cleaner because you're only touching the glass and you don't have to like press down.
Yeah, well, yeah, you put very little effort into setting a touch, which I think from a usability standpoint is good, because you know like to make a screen that works for everyone, you want it to make sure that, you know, no one has to exert themselves to use it.
Exactly.
That'd be the worst usability thing if you had to like get a hammer to press down on your phone, right?
But it does have the slight disadvantage of it doesn't work if you're wearing like thick gloves or something, because there's no way of like the electricity traveling through to like you, because
actually,
it works
yeah.
because you're a conductor. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense, because there's a lot of, like when you're wearing gloves and stuff, sometimes they don't work.
And it's also why if there's a bit of water on your screen, it acts all funny because it thinks it's being like pressed in multiple locations at once, because it's like traveling, the electricity's traveling through to the water.
Wow. Okay. That's really cool. Okay. So given that, I mean, I guess with the glass being stronger and stronger nowadays, you don't have to worry about this too much. But could you actually break a touchscreen, or like this kind of the tech underneath by pressing too hard? Or
I don't think so. Like, yeah, the glass is thicker relative to everything else, and so like you'd have to break the glass for anything to break below that.
And it makes sense as well. Well, because like when the glass is broken, people can still use their touch screens, because the glass is just there as a protective layer, but also it's not reliant on the glass to function, as in like if the glass wasn't there, it could still probably work, right?
Yeah, exactly. As long as like the really thin conductor is still intact and is like roughly in the right spot. Yeah, there's no reason why it couldn't work.
That is crazy. I mean, in most use cases, it would most likely just fail and fall apart. I wonder if they would work to somehow, like, not, I don't know like how possible it is, but integrating those layers together. So like they're separate components, but would there be a way to, I guess like phones have already gone thin enough, and I think people are sick of phones getting tinier, but I think it's cool. It's a cool engineering like parameter push. Like how far can you get a device? Like how tiny can you get it and still have the same functionality?
Yeah, for sure. I know what you mean, but I don't think the screen is the limiting factor there. I think it's like we were talking about
like
before, the
electronics
TVs. It's like all the electronics. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But like, I think they're thin enough. I'd say it reaches a point where it's just like less usable than it was before.
Well, actually, we hit a period where we got like thinner and smaller phones like constantly, and then all of a sudden they got a little bit bigger and a little bit thicker and a little bit larger, because people were like, actually, I want to be able to hold this in my hand comfortably. I feel like I might actually go read up on this later, because this is fairly interesting. And it's like, and there's heaps of like other screen types, right? There's dozens of like outside of like what the ones we mentioned.
Yeah, well, like these are the main ones, and there's all like many different subsections of these that are manufactured slightly differently and have like slightly different parameters. But sort of the push in general would be to make screens cheaper and to like pack in more pixels so it looks better to us.
Well, I think that wraps it all up. Evan, would you like to do the outro?
Yeah, sure thing. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to this. I hope you've derived some enjoyment from our ramblings, and I hope you've learned something most of all. So I've been Evan.
And I've been Jono.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye! And check us out on Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Podcast, Radio Public, Spotify, and YouTube.